standing in the middle of the foundation of the brick house, or near the foundation. Based on the maps, it probably would have been over here in this area behind me. That foundation was located during the archaeological digs that were done here in 2001 and 2008. Talked a little bit about this earlier this morning, that at least on the bus, that the digs revealed artifacts dating back to the 1750s. To this day, we do not know who lived in this house. Across the road and on the other side of this tree line directly behind you, in the area now owned by the South Carolina Department of Inland Fisheries. We're in the middle of the British camp. We're in the heart of Stuart's army prior to the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Now, switching sides, we last left Nathaniel Greene in the middle of July at his camp in the high hills of the Santee. Greene has taken his army there following the siege of 96. Again, he's been heavily campaigning since the middle of March. He's fought a battle at Guilford Courthouse, Hobkirk Hill, laid siege at 96, and now he knows it's time to give his men a rest. And he spends roughly about a month in the high hills of the Santee, and he's doing a couple of things. First off, he's obviously riding back and forth to his commander-in-chief, George Washington, as well as the Continental Congress. Washington, the Congress, as well as Greene, are dealing with this pesky French fleet that's sailing somewhere around the Caribbean that Washington hopes will at some point appear off the Atlantic coast to assist the Allied armies. Greene is very much aware of the presence of the French fleet and what it might do to assist his army here in South Carolina. He's riding to Washington in the hopes of getting that French fleet under the Comte de Grasse to sail to Charleston so he can bring his army out of the interior of South Carolina, lay siege and capture Charleston with the assistance of the French fleet. Obviously, we know that does not happen. De Grasse instead goes to the Chesapeake in the middle of August. There's also another thing that Greene is doing with the Continental Congress. Greene is very much aware that the belligerent nations of Europe are in the process of negotiating a peace treaty that could bring an end to the war in North America. There has been some rumblings amongst the powers, specifically Prussia and Russia, that a truce could be broken between the United States and Great Britain that would essentially split off Canada and the 13 colonies. And the militia, mainly I think because of the leadership of the seasoned veterans in the form of Francis Marion and Andrew Pickens, they start to drive the British back toward where we are standing. But eventually, they start to run out of steam. And when they start to run out of steam, that is when Greene's going to order up his North Carolina Continentals under Jethro Sumner. Continentals are going to come up, cover the retreat of the militia, and they're going to engage the British. But the North Carolina Continentals are going to expend their ammunition, and they're going to start to gradually pull back. When the British see this, their line will lurch forward. Sumner rallies his men, he orders a volley, and brings the British to a halt. Greene is watching this all the while, and he knows that the momentum is on his side. And that's when he decides to order up the Virginia Continentals and the Maryland Continentals under Otho Williams. And Greene will write in his report that those men are told to sweep the field with the bayonet. Greene orders a bayonet charge. Now, the Virginia Continentals, the Maryland Continentals, these are some of the best troops that the Continental Army has to offer Northern or Southern theater. These are veterans of Camden, of Cowpens, Guilford Courthouse, Hobkirk Hill, 96. Once they enter the fight, they begin to drive Stuart's line steadily backwards. So they drive the line backwards. Henry Lee's infantry out on Greene's far right flank gets in. On Stuart's far left flank, they infilade the line. And the British line, if you're standing here from left to right, gradually begins to give way. Sheridan, with the New York Volunteers and the 84th Regiment of Foot, begins to pull back from his reserve position steadily until he reaches the brick house and the palisaded garden. Greene has effectively driven the British from the field. Greene is going to decide to send the Continentals, the Virginians, the Delawares, and the Marylanders in a series of direct assaults against the brick house and against the palisaded garden. Among those who fall wounded in front of the brick house somewhere out here in this open area is John Edgar Howard, one of the finest regimental commanders in the history of the United States Army. Next to him is Isaac Duval of the 1st Maryland, probably shot earlier during the initial British withdrawal back to this area. Isaac Duval had led and survived the final assault at 96 just several months earlier. The Marylanders can't take it, the Virginians can't take it, the Delawares cannot take this position. One of the reasons why it is thought that they cannot drive the British out of the palisaded garden and the brick house comes from the account of Greene's adjutant general, Eutaw Williams, himself a prolific writer. Williams talks about in his writings after the battle that the British camp located in this area and just beyond the tree line behind you served as an obstacle to the advance, which it certainly did. These men are now having to break formation, their linear formation, to navigate attacking through the rows of tents. Williams makes a claim, if you will, that the reason that the attack was further broken up because the men stopped to take to the rum and loot the camp that had been left behind when Stuart withdrew. Here's the problem that I have with that account. Rum is not going to be kept in the soldiers' tents. The rum ration is going to be in the rear. You don't want to issue your rum ration, your daily gill of rum, to a British soldier early in the morning.
All right, here I am for the first time at the Eutaw Springs battlefield. You can see some people around. You might be able to see some memorials and markers and whatnot. And we are, talking about September of 1781. And in that particular month, you're going to have the Americans, the Continentals, the Patriots, sort of making their way further into the South Carolina backcountry. And fort after fort is falling. By now it's September. This is about 4 years after the Battle of Brandywine and hundreds of miles away from there, here in central South Carolina, not far from Columbia, South Carolina. You have Nathaniel Greene, who has racked up a lot more defeats than victories, but nonetheless is, making progress. Every time he wins, every time he loses, the British seem to lose more territory to the guy. And here it is, September, the month before Yorktown. There's going to be a fierce fight here. Maybe 2,000 Patriots, Continentals, not nearly that many British. Greene is facing off against a guy named Alexander Stewart. That's not the Civil War Alexander P. Stewart, who is a lieutenant general. This, we're talking about a British colonel. There is an initial fight with the dragoons and some of the initial American forces. That's going off in this direction that I'm showing you over there. There's going to be a stiff fight, and then both armies array for battle in a second line. And there's going to be a back and forth fight, except Greene does something different here. He does not form a defense in depth with the with a defense in depth. It is an offense in depth. He puts his militia in the front, and you know what? They perform well here at this particular battle, fighting fiercely. Numerous casualties are going to be, suffered by the Americans and the British. This is one of the bloodiest battles in all of South Carolina during the Revolutionary War, and eventually the Americans are going to push the British back after an intense struggle over near some Blackjack Forest over in that direction, over near a palisaded garden over to my right. The British are holding up at a brick house in this area, and eventually the fighting comes to bear, but the Americans can make it no further. They may have plundered some of the British camps at this point, and then you really have sort of an end to the fighting. They've been fighting for hours already, more than 1,000 casualties combined on both sides, and you are going to have a sort of a cease in the fighting with the British leave first. So call that one of Nathaniel Greene's rare victories. Thank you for watching. The American Battlefield Trust has been able to preserve some land here at Eutaw Springs. This is part of our budding Liberty Trail. So thank you all for your support of battlefield preservation and education.